Oh yeah, you
right.
accused me of being a
Johnny
Depeche
Cash
Mode
colored.
fan. That's not.
Yeah, because he's like, because black would be like satanic and diabolic until Depeche Mode came along, and then it just became Depeche Mode. It's just like, they stole it. They stole black on black. You know.
I have no affinity at all with Depeche Mode. None whatsoever.
No.
So, hello, gentlemen. Welcome to Parallax Sweeny versus Bard with Hamelryck. This is our third year of doing this thing. We're talking about Tantra. That's our subject today, which is in a way, it's a horrible subject, in my opinion, because it's hard to talk about because there's so many misconceptions about what it is, and also it's been hijacked by popular culture. So that's my opinion.
I already disagree, but anyway.
Okay, so me and Hamelryck disagree. I can just say that everything I learned about Tantra probably I got from Chogyam Trungpa and what's the other guy who wrote Dawn of Tantra? Herbert Gunther and he wrote books in the 70s and 80s about Tantra.
We should say that.
That's
Herbert
Buddhist
Gunther,
Tantra, and that's
Herbert
for me.
Gunther he's a Canadian like Andrew here, Herbert Gunther.
Exactly.
And he opened the door by writing his own books, and then started co-writing with Chogyam Trungpa in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And that is the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism in the West that has stayed. It's definitely the serious version.
I would disagree with the term Tibetan Buddhism, but that's I think how Tantra entered.
That's the term they use,
the
so that's why I used it. That's a term Gunther uses in his own work.
Well,
and of course,
Trungpa really
Vajrayana.
wanted it to. He took away all of the Tibetan language, when he was doing the teachings, and he wanted to go back to the Sanskrit Indian language and America. He wanted to Americanize it and make it completely contemporary for Western people and sort of get rid of like the baggage of medieval Tibetanism and which a lot of people from Hollywood sort of adopted this sort of like Tibetanism, which was kind of gross, and he didn't like that very much. So
but you can also find it in Nepal and in Japan, right?
Japan and Korea, and I found that it's everywhere actually in the Far East. I realized that when I went to the Ghibli Museum in Paris, that around before the 12th century, it was everywhere, all over the Far East. There were Vajras,
Tantra is a Silk Route practice. There are versions of Tantra in all the three Silk Route religions. So you have Buddhist Tantra, certainly. You have different varieties of that. You have Zoroastrian Tantra, and you have Taoist Tantra. And if you look at a map, you will discover that what we call Zoroastrian Tantra is essentially what originates in Persian Central Asia, which connects the other two ends, which is Chinese Tantra, which usually is labeled under Taoism, sometimes under Buddhism in China, certainly. And then also when you talk about Tantra in India and Nepal, it's usually labeled as Buddhism. But we should note that these labels were put there by historians long after Tantra was explored. And Tantra is the most the most obvious example of something syncretic that's been developed along trade routes, and where people who's got off the trade route now and then and got up into the mountains to isolate themselves for 12 years, just breathing or whatever, and did kind of hardcore exercises, that became part of Tantric tradition. So that's why there's so much there. There's so much for us to dig into and explore. Well, and we should here point out the West has no equivalent.
Yeah, and the word Tantra means to weave, right? So I guess that means weaving a lot of different things together. So it has a lot of potential for, let's say, using, it's in Buddhism they call it upaya, or skillful means. So there's a sexual Tantra, there's an artistic Tantra, there's solitary yogi Tantra, there's all kinds of Tantras. In fact, I was told that there's 84,000 different Tantras. That's just like a kind of number they use to mean like a lot,
Yeah, and clearly what they all share, these traditions share, is to have this atmosphere of no barred absolutes we talked about. There's nothing you cannot involve. Everything that exists, it's accessible to the tradition. So you cannot do this when you're young. You certainly can't do when you're a child. And most grown-ups probably can't go into tantric practices either. This is why we make a distinction between Sutra and Tantra. Thomas, why don't you explain here how you define the difference between Sutra and Tantra?
Well, traditionally, the Buddhists often speak about the tradition of renunciation, and then Tantra would be the tradition of or the practices of transformation. And I think that you could, for example, you could take the example of anger. So a sutric approach would be we're going to avoid anger, and we're going to develop a lifestyle and practices that make sure that we do not fall into the delusions of anger, while a tantric attitude would be
in fact, all the emotions, not just anger.
That emotion, the power, the energy of anger can be put to good use. So I think that a classic tantric way of looking at anger is clarity, because you're focused on one thing and you're very passionately engaged with it. So there's a lot of material to work with, and you can transform that into what you could call effective interaction with the world. But as Andrew will probably point out tonight, so you have to kind of couple it with a sutric practice, especially in Buddhism. There is no tantra by itself. You always couple that with sutric practice, because you always need to practice renunciation in certain areas, and then learn how to practice transformation, like this more difficult practice on top of that. So you could say that the sutra would be the bedrock of tantra. That would be a Buddhist view.
Yeah, you would have a sutric world outside of the tantric world. Obviously,
they would be coupled. It
wouldn't be outside. It would be the tantric world. It would be included within, but the tantric would transcend it on some level.
For you, yes, as a tantric practitioner, but since you're obviously going to interact sooner or later with people who are not in a tantric worldview at all, they don't share your worldview. They're hopefully in some kind of a sutric world, and you have to move into sutric world. That's why you have an inside and an outside here. There's an inside to the tantric practice. There's an outside to it, which hopefully is then where the sutric practice takes place. This is the problem with Western culture. What I've argued all along in our discussions on this topic, and why there's an impossibility to Tantra in the West, is that we have two dominant modes in the West called Islam and Christianity. And these two religions are based on what I always refer to as the cult of transparency. And I think the cult of transparency, that everything should be accessible to just about everybody, except for children maybe being out of the way. But other than that, everything should be accessible for everybody, meaning some things are not accessible to anybody. For example, extramarital sex is banned both in Islam and Christianity. So anything you can't deal with, because Sutra says you cannot do this. If this is being done anywhere, it has to be done in some kind of a sacred space that we could refer to as tantric space. But if you say first that everything is accessible to everybody, there's no limit. If God is immediately accessible to you, this is core to Islam and Christianity. And if God is immediately accessible to you, there cannot be a sacred space in between you and God. So if there can't be a space between you and God, as soon as God is accessible to you because you're a faithful believer and you have become a Muslim, you become a Christian, then because of that direct accessibility, then there can be no tantric space in between. And if there can be no tantric space, you can only live in a strictly sutric world. So it's a world of a lot of morality, and these are the things that are allowed, and these are the things you must not pursue, and they're close to you. And no matter how much you talk about esoteric traditions or occult traditions in the West or mystery traditions, I've never even seen a trace of the past 2,000 years. We really properly pursued a tantric tradition in the West. And whenever it's been tried, for example, with the Cathars during the Middle Ages in Southern Europe, it was immediately attacked by the Catholic or the Orthodox churches and extinguished. Like people were murdered for going into any realm.
It's also usually destroyed within a Buddhist culture as well.
I'm sure it is controversial in any culture. I mean,
like in Sri Lanka, there's these images of they're called the yabyung. They're like the female and the male in sexual union, and they're a popular tantric iconic image, and they're illegal in Sri Lanka.
Oh, really? Oh,
because in Sri Lanka they consider that to be a perversion of Sutric Buddhism, and so yes, tantric is a perversion to Sutric Buddhism. If you're
probably because those temples and those areas where you see those pictures have been open to the public.
Yeah, but let me just say one more thing.
There's a problem. These cultures, I mean, if you go to Sri Lanka or India, you realize also that one of the problems is that places that were definitely sacred spaces in the past, they were close to the public. They were only open to certain people to do certain practices. Now, when these spaces have been turned into museums and open to the public, and you make dollars out of letting anybody wants to go inside these places, then of course you get a public opinion that says, hey, these places are evil and nasty. We're not prepared for this. So then you have to ban them. And then you go after Tantra.
I think
Tantra is again misplaced, right?
Just one. I just want to say one more thing. Let me because I was trying to continue my thought here. Is that Tantra actually includes Sutra, but Sutra does not include Tantra, because Tantra Tantra is a higher level of religion. In my opinion, so it can include Sutric practices when they are useful and necessary for people, and in fact they usually do. But I would say.
Thomas, what were you about to say?
So I think it's also the access to the Western public that made it a problem, because at some point these countries in Asia were very worried about the Western attitude towards Tantra. The West interpreted Tantra as unacceptable, incompatible with Christianity, and so on. So they became very judgmental of it. And then so there was an incentive to hide those practices and to condemn them. So in some sense, this negative attitude towards Tantra can also be ascribed to the influence of the West. So
I totally agree.
And scholars that write about that.
And one of the things I heard, I think it was Fabrice, you met Fabrice Midal, told me that he said most of Western Buddhism is a mixture of Stoicism, Epicureanism, and a lot of Protestantism, and they haven't quite got to Buddhism yet, in a way.
No. And I can then say that this is the same problem when Islam encounters tantric practices. So the entire history of Islam, the past 1,400 years, you've had Sufis who try to be tantric. You certainly have a lot of Zoroastrians in Central Asia who try to be tantric, or keep the tantric tradition running parallel with the sutric again. But as soon as the Muslim invasions came to Central Asia, they often resulted in that, you got to go after all these tantric symbolism everywhere. And of course, that's why you don't see any tantric temples left anywhere in Central Asia, because they were all burned down and destroyed by the Muslims. So you had the same thing. It was the cleansing, the purification of society was key to Islam and Christianity. Yeah. And this is exactly where they go sutra only with their specific sutra, and then disqualify everything tantric, and then go after the tantric. And I think what's important here to emphasize is that this is a necessity, I would argue, if you started with the call to transparency. The call to transparency, that's like in the New Testament. Christ is on the cross. And while Christ is on the cross, the curtain in the temple falls down. Right. And once the curtain falls down, that means that the difference between the sacred room and the most sacred room in the temple has disappeared. Yeah. And the most sacred room has become accessible to everybody. So everybody is a faithful believer, a child of God, has direct access to the most sacred, meaning you can talk directly to God. Yeah. And that sounds fantastic. And it was a fantastic sell. There are reasons why Christianity and Islam became so widespread and so popular. They went for the quantity. These were religions that wanted to be mass spread. They had universal claims. It was clear that both Christianity, both with Paul and Augustine, and certainly later Muhammad and Salman the Persian who founded Islam, they wanted to establish a universal religion, and everybody should become a Muslim or a Christian around the world. And to do that and make it popular, why not offer the ultimate religious gift, which is that you are chosen by God. You are a tiny God yourself without effort, and here's direct access to God. And if you look at it that way and compare the East and the West, then you had to sacrifice the tantric. And the tantric traditions were weak already in the West. They were certainly practiced during polytheism, Roman Empire, etc., because those systems were falling apart. And these sort of simplified, sales pitchy mass religions came along, first Christianity and Islam, with universal claims. They sacrificed one thing, that was Tantra. And they're suffering from it today, still to this day. And the problem today, while we have the crisis of Christianity, we're now also seeing the crisis of Islam. These religions go into a fundamentalist last mode before they probably implode, is because they're no longer sustainable in the sort of internet world we're moving into now, where everything will truly be accessible, but from an informational point of view. All knowledge will be available to everybody. And if that's happening, and history catches up with you, and you can't lie any longer. You can't have a religion that says that, by the way, when you die, you're going to go to heaven. Just by saying yes to Allah or saying yes to Jesus, you go to heaven. Okay, but nobody believes that any longer, because it's obviously not true. and that faith goes out the door, what is then left of a religion that gambled its entire game, put its entire game into Sutra only, cheap shot, you get to heaven so we can expand and become universal?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
I don't see those problems with Eastern religion at all. That's why I think the East is the future of religion.
That's the critique of Christianity and Islam. At the beginning, Thomas, you said that you disagreed with me about that when I was saying that Tantra has been co-opted by pop religion. So I'm wondering about Tantra, and the West, and why Tantra would be important now in the West, and what do you think about that?
Well, I think that Alexander is I mean, I agree with not with everything. I don't. I mean, I have a different idea about Christianity and also what went wrong there. Mm-hmm. But I think it's correct that these insights that come from the East, Tantra, for example, that it can be incredibly enriching to the West. Where I disagree with you, Andrew, is that you have this narrative. There's this uncorrupted, pure Tantra, which is a true religion, and the Westerners take it over, and then they turn it into commercialism and into a joke, right? I disagree with that. Basically, what's happening right now is that the West is trying to integrate all of these tantric ideas and other ideas that come from the West. So it's an incredible creative period where a lot of people are doing stuff that doesn't make sense, that needs to get better, or that is absolutely suboptimal. But that's the price you pay for creativity. People are experimenting. I think this is a very exciting moment, and I think this is a good development.
Okay,
Trungpa said, Trungpa said something
that.
like he brought Tantric Buddhism essentially for the first time to the West in the 1970s. I think he said something like it'll take about 500 years before you get it.
Because there was a lot of chaos. So Tantric is uniquely adapted to chaos, I think.
It's trade routes again. We're talking about
in the hippie times, and
we're talking about the trade routes here, Andrew, and that's the point. It's impossible to put essentialism into religious practice that's been practiced along the trade routes. The trade routes work this way, that you go into one oasis town and you have a certain school of thought that dominates there, probably the local Kastag, as they were called along the Silk Route. These were, of course, the first monasteries we know of in history. And there was a Kastag, and they had a certain spiritual practice. And basically, any spiritual practice would do in the sense that its job was to clean your head after having done a bad deal in the bazaar before you went on to the next oasis. Or if you were going home and you'd done your trade and you were finished, you were going to go back and, to present yourself in the best way possible and to be, honest and truthful when you came back with your trade, you had to go through some kind of a spiritual awakening thing before you did that. So there was a huge market, if you want to use that word, for spirituality, which makes sense. If you're a trader, airport lounges often have prayer halls next to them. There's a point to that, right? Okay. So these spiritual practices changed slightly from one place to the next. And nobody worried about that. That's of course what happened. It was an evolution. So you go from one place to the next, and they would go different directions with the spiritual. But in general, they always had this sort of Sutra Tantra divide. And I think the way it was offered in the Kastag was that, okay, Sutra is how you do trade. You're a trader. Mm-hmm. So you want to come home and impress people with a good trade you've done, finally, after 6 months or a year or whatever. And then, by the way, there's a hill up there, and we have some guys here who decided to go off the trade route for 3 or 4 years and go into deep spiritual practice and pursue that. And then maybe come back and not be traders at all, either take on traders and treat them and take care of them, as you would do if you're a priest in a Kastag, or, maybe develop the spiritual practice in a certain direction because it's no longer suitable to the needs in this specific area. That's what people did all the time. And then we look at the map of Central Asia, it's no coincidence that the superpower of the sort of monasterial practice eventually became Tibet. It's located right in between these trade routes. And obviously the Hindu Kush was full of them too. And one of the things I'm doing research on at the moment is that I agree with Herbert Gunther, who wrote this in the 1970s, that we miss out completely is that Padmasambhava, who's more important actually to Vajrayana than the Buddha himself ever was. I mean, there's a claim that Gautam, Shakyamuni is the origin of Buddhism, but when you study Vajrayana's Padmasambhava, it goes back to all the time. It's a bit like, yeah, the Old Testament is important to Christianity, you should read it, but the Exodus is really about the Jews and not about us. Yeah, and now it's a more spiritual thing, and with Christians, that's why the New Testament is more important. So the New Testament here, in Vajrayana Buddhism, which I just call Vajrayana, because it at least as Zoroastrian as it is Buddhist, was started by Padmasambhava. Where did he come from? Of course, he was Zoroastrian. He came from Central Asia. And the funny thing with the Buddhist traditions is
it was a Persian refugee or something like that.
It was a Persian refugee, exactly. The name itself, it's not Indian. The construction is a typical Sanskrit construction of a name underneath which you have.
And he was kicked out of Tibet eventually because Tibet wanted to get rid of all non-Indians because they wanted their Buddhism to be pure Indian.
And the sacred land that people talked about all the time in Tibet at the time of Vajrayana was current Tajikistan. So even the name Tajik is part of the holy name of the holy land in Tibetan traditions. So it's clearly that the connection with Central Asia was incredibly strong, which makes sense if you think of Tibet as a byproduct of the trade routes. Now, you can't have essentialism in that kind of culture. It's unfathomable, won't exist. So you can't have a pure Tantra, like a fundamentalist Tantra in any whatsoever. That itself is
I agree with all that. That's
So we can probably agree that what we call religious fundamentalism today is incredibly rare in history, and it's usually a modern phenomenon. So most spiritual practices are like from one place to the next. They change over time, and there's a certain evolution to them. And that's when you look at, for example, religion as we know it, spiritual practices along the trade routes of Asia. You have Indian traditions, you have the Central Asian, Persian traditions, you have Sogdia, Bhakti, whatever. You come into Xinjiang today, East Turkestan historically, where a lot of Manichaeans stayed for a long time. There were Manichaeans longer than anybody else.
There were Manichaeans in Tibet too. There was Christians in Tibet. I didn't know that. There was Neoplatonists in Tibet. All kinds of
course.
I didn't realize that before. I sort of had this vision of Tibet as a sort of isolated place, but in the 8th century it was full of all kinds.
You can go to Xi'an in China today. Today it's a city of 11 million people, but it was the biggest city in the world for over 2,000 years. And you should go there. That's what the terracotta warriors, everything is. Xi'an is the Rome of China. Okay, You go to Xi'an, and they have the Persian quarters. Mistakenly often translated as Islamic or Muslim quarters. They're not. They're Persian quarters. This, of course, where all the traders stayed. And it's a large part of the city, still the funniest, the nicest part of the city where the nightclubs and everything are. But, bazaars, trade routes, everything is there. And they've kept it. It's been there all along because you still today, when you drive a truck rather than you ride a camel, you come from the west you go east and you come to Xi'an. Xi'an is the first major city once you come down into the flatland of China, where, almost 1 billion people live. And Xi'an was the most important city in the world for 2,000 years. So and the second most important one was Cairo, the other end of the Silk Route.
So the point of all this is really that the Tantra, the fertile ground for Tantra is really a cosmopolitan and intellectually quite rich, sophisticated marketplace.
But then you need to add the topology to it. I would say that you're very likely to find what we would call Tantric practices in the Kazakhs along the trade routes. Because the traders come in and they go in and out. And it's all about basically, have you settled your balances before you left? Have you done your credits and your debits? Or are you leaving our oasis with the big debts? Because then when your cousin comes next year and doesn't know about it, we'll have to kill him, whatever. It's very hands-on, which is what Sutra is when it's great. But the Tantric practice are more like, okay, in addition to this, because we have the affluence that can afford it, we have people who go into the mountains, and they go into the mountains to do these different practices. And then there are, of course, what we call shamanic and androgynous characters too, who are also more likely to go into Tantric practice because they really don't fit into the sort of Sutric world of general society.
Yeah.
And they are the ones you find in esoteric orders and things like that in the West, but very much marginalized in society, not with a voice, and really with no value to the establishment of, say, Orthodox and Catholic Christianity. Because believe me, Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, I've stayed with the monks in the monasteries, and they're incredibly boring compared to the monasteries I stayed with in Asia. incredibly boring. You know, it's just, no, it's no fun. He says naked bathing is like incredibly, you know, controversial in Orthodox monasteries. It's like, you can't even take your clothes off and take a swim in the lake naked. Hey, you're not even close to Tibet here, right? It's boring like hell. And that's why I find it almost laughable to people to claim that, yeah, but we can be tantric and still be Christian and still be Muslim. I don't see that, because the very fundament of those beliefs, of those belief systems, disqualifies tantric practices, declares them as undesirable, as even destructive.
Well, I think Puritanism,
a lot of the sort of devil worship and Satanism. But a lot of the Satanism and devil worship are actually things that are included in tantric practices in the East.
Well, it seems that, I mean, again, Trungpa said give it 500 years, right? Christianity is, for example, is like that's an excellent basis for a Sutric religion. You just have to get rid of some you know, the absurd obsession with sexuality, because Christianity is about violence, not about sexuality. Christianity at its core actually understands that the main problem is violence, not sexuality. But then over the course of the development of that religion, they got obsessed with regulating sexuality, which is reasonable because sexuality is a cause of conflict in the tribe, and that means it is a source of the victimage mechanism, the formation of mobs and killing of scapegoats, and Christianity is very concerned with that. But they got it all wrong, so they see sexuality as a central problem, while it's basically just something. It's like dynamite, right? Dynamite can be dangerous, but it can also be very useful, and Christianity doesn't really understand that very well. But it will. Otherwise, it will disappear. That's the only thing. Either Christianity will understand that and develop that, or it will disappear. It's very simple.
Or be marginalized because it can't handle it.
No, it will certainly be marginalized, because we are moving towards a very pluralistic society where people will have very different religions, and people will combine very different religions. And Tantra
I think there is a sort of
really a religion. Yeah. Tantra is something that piggybacks on top of religion. It's not a religion in itself. You see, if you look at the history of Tantra, you know, it's such a mess. Everybody disagrees. Everybody has a different story. You have your story. You know, Wallace has another story, and blah blah blah. But it seems that it just spreads all over different religions: Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism. You can find it everywhere. So it seems to be something that it's a way of being. It's very practical. It's about practices. It's about developing, looking into the problem of identity and things like that. And that basically goes beyond all of these simplistic religions. So I think it's kind of like an oil spill, right? It just spreads everywhere. And that's currently going on in the West. And that's why I kind of have this discussion with Andrew about, you know, the problem that it's commercialized and stuff like that. Who cares? I mean, commercialize it away. If it doesn't work, if it's low quality, it will disappear. If it's creative, then it will flourish.
Well, I don't know.
Commercialize it as much as you want.
See, there is like, okay, so as you say, there's a Bard absolute, right? So there has to be, I don't know how to say that, but you know, in the Tantra communities that I've been in, they need to be protected. They need to be isolated from, you know, from the. There has to be an alchemical chamber for all that to work, or otherwise it you know.
I agree with both of you, but Andrew, I think the pointer is that we're moving towards cosmopolitanism. Yeah. And if you don't want to be part of cosmopolitanism, your only choice is to be the underclass in the digital age. Okay. If you want to be in any way successful in the future, in future society, you have to become a cosmopolitan.
Yeah, but if you want to practice Buddhism, you have to do...
Let me finish it. So if you become a cosmopolitan, it's impossible to be an essentialist or a fundamentalist in any way whatsoever. Cosmopolitanism requires total openness. It requires that you seek atagonia. It requires that you seek to be challenged at all times. It requires that you're on a journey until the day you die to be more and more enlightened as you go along. You can only be enlightened by constantly being challenged. It requires plurality, as Thomas points out. It requires decentralization. It requires an agora of constant argumentation. Okay, that is where Tantra comes into the picture. It is impossible then for the people at least to pursue the ideals of cosmopolitanism to not go into Tantra. You cannot pursue cosmopolitanism as a kind of vulgar Christian or Islamic worldview. I think this is where guys like Jordan Peterson will ultimately fail, in the sense that they're sort of post-Christian, neo-Christian, whatever. They don't see that to sort of go back and make your bed and that will somehow solve the problem. But by the way, we can't solve the problems of the world because capitalism will still be around. Well, you can't say that you're going to make your bed in one chapter of a book and then the next chapter of the book say the world cannot be changed at all. That's Jordan Peterson. He gets stuck there all the time. And he gets stuck precisely with the Sutra finds its limitations. So the Tantra is absolutely necessary for cosmopolitanism. I think I agree with you that it has to be sacred space and the Bard Absolute has to be reinstalled. There has to be a distance between God and believer. There has to be journey. You go on and you might never reach God. And that's precisely the point because that's exactly how Tantra works. I agree with that. And I think commercialism in this sense makes everything profane because we're trained to it. But where I agree with Thomas is that that's, again, an essentialist position to say that commercialism can never be united with Tantra.
No, I didn't say that.
Exactly when you fall into the essentialist trap, which you can't do. That. Tantra is exactly that, which precisely when you think this world at least is tantric and free because it's free from capital and all the, the profane absurdities of capitalism, whatever. And then it comes back with a vengeance and catches up with you. That is precisely what Tantra does. So I agree with Thomas is that you can't make any rules except for one. It is a Bard Absolute, meaning it's a world that cannot be understood or comprehended by a person who calls himself a child of God. It can only be comprehended and understood and possibly fathomed by a person who accepts that I'm going to be an adult of God and I'm going to work towards being a divine adult rather than being a divine child. And that's why I think Islam and Christianity. I just but only on the margins.
Don't like the idea of making Tantra easy and cheap.
Nobody said that.
So
nobody made that claim, Andrew.
Right, this book here is about it's like from my friend Greg. It's about the introductory practices to Tantra, which are actually very traditional. Yes, they are. There is a fundamental aspect to it. It's traditional.
I know, Greg.
111,000 prostrations, and then you do that. That's how you get. That's how you get.
Well, good luck with that.
What? Well, if
let's just get. Commandos.
Some people can do that. Lots of people have, and some
frustrations. People. What's the fucking point of that? That's just a cultural thing that you now take over because it's easy to do. There's nothing easier.
But that's
just 200,000
Vajrayana Buddhism. Like, you can't just make it easy for Western people who want to have
But Andrew,
doing 100,000 prostrations is super easy. It's just something you do. Just do it. Anybody can do it, and then you say, "Look what I did." You just spend a lot of time.
I'm not saying anybody should do that at all. I'm just saying
it can be a great practice, or it can be an escapism in exotic religion. And for most Westerners, it is.
I should add here.
Exotic practice.
Well, then, but also for most Westerners, they take the exotic part, but won't actually do the practices. Most Westerners...
Listen, Andrew, don't become an essentialist because then you fall into the trap of falling back into Sutra. My point here is this. I know Greg too. By the way, highly recommended book to read. It complements Herbert Gunter's and Chogyam Trungpa's work in the 1970s. Greg is trying to make a 2020s version of their work. Admirably so. He's great guy. Love Greg. And I'm dying to go to Ann Arbor and visit the community. I think Trungta Kepra and his community are doing great work. But again, Tantra is not that alone. It cannot be a specific school.
Oh, no, it can't.
It must be practiced for years. And where you give away your money, you move into a community and you stay there for 14 years, you go through tons of practices, and then you're supposed to reach some kind of enlightenment. Yeah, that's one way of practicing it. But again, ritual can become incredibly empty. And by just doing a ritual, it's actually easy. It's easy to stay 14 years doing rituals that you don't understand why you're doing them at all. And that's also missing the point. You can never arrive at a Tantra where we say that this is Tantra, here's the course.
I'm not
and
saying
then you do the course and follow it. Whether you pay for it or not doesn't matter. Tantra has to be alive.
I'm saying that when Trump came to America, he gave everything to people, like the whole path, not like just one part of it. To please people's ego. Everything was available. You could go and do a 3-year retreat. You could become a monk. You could do various things. You could be a sort of wild yogi. There's all kinds of possibilities in that path. But you can't water it down or give you
No, but what does that mean, water it down? I mean, again, it sounds a bit like, well, if you want to do traditional Vajrayana, then you can say that, right? I mean, you can do traditional Vajrayana, you want to do all of these traditional practices, that's great, that's fantastic, right? Then you do Vajrayana. But Trungpa himself said, well, American Tantra should be completely American. And if you look at what he did, right, he took his own tradition and then he completely transformed it and offered something unique to the United States.
Exactly.
But
everybody who would get the Tantric teaching
about the 100,000 frustrations and stuff like that. He reinterpreted and gave it and made it kind of uniquely fitting that moment. And that's a very tantric attitude. I'm not against these 100,000 prostrations, and I certainly think that Vajrayana has thousands of years of tradition behind it, right? If you want to do that, you can only get that from people who are actually skilled in that. So there I'm not in disagreement with you, but we are talking about, let's say, generalized Tantra, right? We're not talking about Tantra as a set of specific religious practices that you need to follow, but we are investigating what is the aim of Tantra. Just like we did with Christianity. What's the aim of Christianity? And my point with Christianity, and that's why I'm not so critical of Christianity as Alexander, my point about Christianity is that Christianity examines violence and exposes the scapegoat mechanism. That's where its brilliance lies. The rest of Christianity, with life after death and this obsession with sexuality and stuff like that, that's not, I don't think that's something that Christianity is so great about, right? So now we're investigating what does that actually mean? What's the core of Tantra?
What's the core of Tantra? Go ahead.
Okay, let me just finish that first with Christianity. I think it's very easy, though, to explain why that happened. The Roman Empire was dominating the world that Christianity was introduced to. The other empire was the Persian Empire, which was largely Zoroastrian at the time. So Christianity moved into the Roman Empire. And Paul became its number one sales guy. And if you just read the letters of Paul, they're quite brilliant. He's a Gnostic, apparently. And of course, if there was widespread sexual orgies, Dionysian orgies in the Greek and the Roman temples, and they were only accessible to small elite that could afford to have sex slaves or whatever, then there was tons of envy. There was certainly certain violence among the slave morality people that he was going for in terms of Christianity. And then when you come with the gospel that says that actually you guys that don't have access to those sort of sexual orgies in there, that are actually kind of meaningless anyway, you have access to those, you will go to heaven. And the guys who go into that temple and go off and pursue all the sexuality that they want and get everything out of life and are hedonistic, they will never get to heaven. That is essentially Christianity. That is Paulinist Christianity. Undeniably so. That is both Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant.
I don't get that you.
So that's what they did with sexuality.
Story about Christianity after reading Girard. That is just beyond me. That you have such a simplistic idea about Christianity.
No, I do not. This adds to Girard makes us.
Girard exposed the victimage mechanism, the
I know
mechanism, and the whole Roman Empire, the whole world was built on that.
Thomas, don't turn Girard into your essentialism.
I don't get that.
No, Thomas, you're making the same mistake here. You're turning Girard into your essentialism. You're making him a fundamentalist belief that must be practiced. Christianity is more than Girard writes about. Girard never said. Girard never said he wrote.
Buddhism has its own strengths, which are very different from Christianity. There's nothing.
René Girard is a Christian in the sense that refused to properly deal with sexuality and the problem with sexuality Christianity. That is one of the lacks in Girardian books.
And we discussed that many times. You need Girard and you need to put Nietzsche on top of Girard.
I tried to explain.
Girard is only 50% of the story. You need Nietzsche as well because Nietzsche gives the tantric view on it. Girard gives you the sutric view and exposes you like this is what made sense in Christianity, and then Nietzsche adds the tantric view.
Thomas, tell us what's your view? Give me the tantric view from your perspective.
No, wait, let me finish this though before we end on Christianity. We have to finish the West. Andrew, let's finish it. The thing is this: if you read the New Testament, it's full of sexuality, and sexuality is a sin unless it's consent and reproductive. That's where the Pope is absolutely right. It's built upon in his Christianity. Christianity deals with sexuality. It gives a specific job for sexuality to society. It must not stay outside of that. It's incredibly sutric. It has a theory on sexuality. It doesn't hide sexuality.
No, why they did that?
Theory on it, and it's dysfunctional, and it won't work in the long run. It won't work. That's what Christianity always.
I guess, Thomas, like you want to be tantric and Christian at the same time. How can you do that? I mean.
What was that, Andrew?
It seems like you want to be Christian and tantric at the same time. Like you want to have
no. He never said that.
In both camps.
I think we agreed that we separate Tantra from any specific religion. I think we agreed on that.
Yes.
I think any Easterner would agree. They do not associate Tantra directly with Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, or Taoism. They say that's a Western idea of putting these Tantric traditions into religions as if they had popes and Vaticans and everything. The Buddhism was invented as a concept in the 19th century as a unifying theory of a world religion coming out of Asia. They're just different schools of thought, and they enjoy the fact that they're different. That's the trade.
I don't think there's any kind of I mean, because all Buddhist schools have there's certain axioms that people work with and certain practices, and there's like the Four Noble Truths and blah blah blah. You know, there's
but you always have these layers. Buddhism is layers upon layers, right? And every layer corrects the previous layer. You know, like the Sutric layer has its own shortcomings, and then you add the Tantric layer, which corrects the Sutric layer. But then you have other problems, and then you add the Dzogchen layer, which is kind of like a non-layer. It's kind of something that dissolves everything, right? So Buddhism is very, very smart. These 9 vehicles of Buddhism, they're really worth a deep study, because it's a fantastic system. And it's constantly about, you know, you can do this practice, and that will solve a lot of problems, right? But then you actually get other problems caused by the solutions, and then you add another layer, and then you have your own problems, and then in the end you realize, well, there's no real solution. That's kind of like the Dzogchen level, right, where you go like, well, you know, there's no solution, and that's workable.
Yeah.
And if you look at Buddhism today,
is that in every school, every Buddhist school, you have these, you know, these foundational things, just like in Christianity.
Well, every religion like always, you know, religion always ossifies, right? It becomes rigid and obsessed with, you know, you have to do the 100,000 frustrations, otherwise it's not real. And you know, these are all these.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Religious rituals, and it's very dangerous. Tantra is very much concerned with that. Obsession with rituals, and you know, you need to do that and you need to do that, otherwise it's not real. You know, this is very suspect, that kind of reasoning. That's very like
erotic.
I mean, there's obvious problems with that, right? Because you're going to use it to make these very simplistic definitions, you know, inner circle and outer circle. That's not how a tantric attitude works, right? Tantra is very, I mean, as we discussed before, it's spread all over the place, and it affected an enormous amount of religions. That's exactly because it's so protean, because it has so many, it's kind of a shape-shifting thing. It's an attitude, and it's compatible with a lot of religions. I mean, I don't see any problem with a Christian who does Tantra, not in the 21st century. I don't see any problem with that.
Give me the examples. It won't work. They're none of them. They don't exist. The Islamic Tantra doesn't exist. It's not existent.
Well, again,
there's a reason why.
You will not know these
people. Perfectly happy to be wrong, but
sit in church.
The burden of evidence is on you, Thomas. It's totally on you in this case. I say it's impossible. I say with Judaism,
there's definitely Tantra within the Sufi tradition, and I think there is probably some Tantra within esoteric Christianity, but we've had this discussion.
It depends on what you mean with Tantra. For me, Nietzsche is a Christian Tantric.
He's not Christian.
Nietzsche
is not a Christian. That's a ridiculous.
Nietzsche is, in my opinion,
he is not Christian. He hates Christianity, slave morality, and Paul and all the
crucified one. In the end, it took him a long time to realize it himself, and in the end,
he is not a Christian. That's a ridiculous statement, Thomas.
I think
he's
like
Nietzsche is a Nietzschean. No, he's a Nietzschean.
He has all the Christian concerns, and he was very concerned with all of the things that were wrong with Christianity.
He doesn't have a single Christian idea in any of his books. I mean, for God's sake, no. If anything, he points back to Zoroaster.
This is kind of baffling. We've been talking about the importance of standing up against the mob, which is one of the central ideas.
That's not Christian. That is just decency.
That's the core of the New Testament. That's the essence of the New Testament.
What do you think is the core of Zoroastrianism, which is 1700 years old Christianity? Is to stand up against the mob.
The core aspects of the New Testament is.
And if Christianity claims that's the only thing that came up with Thomas, then Christianity rubbish. It is absolute rubbish. That is not a Christian idea at all. It's basically the idea of civilization.
Well, again, it depends what your definition of Christianity is. You have Christianity.
There's very little there.
That's what the Pope says, and that's fine. From that point of view, you're right.
No. There's Paul, there's Augustine, there are the Gospels.
Pope defines, and you're totally right, and I agree with you.
So you cannot put Tantra into a pop religion that simplifies the world.
I don't think about religions in these boxed-in terms like you. That's what
I don't.
The Pope says. If you say like what the Pope says is Christianity, then I agree with you. But that's for me, that has very little to do with Christianity. I see religions as chaotic processes. Just what we talked about in the.
But if you can't even tell
there was a chaos of many
Thomas, listen to me now.
That's how I think about religion.
Thomas, if you can't even if you can't tell the difference between two religions, you're a fucking psychotic. You're not a philosopher, right?
Well,
there are differences.
Well, be, but you can also say like, well, when we talk about Christianity, we can say like these comprise a number of practices and beliefs that range from Orthodox Christianity to Protestant Christianity to Catholic Christianity, and even within those groups there are an enormous amounts of different viewpoints. That's how I think about these religions. And of course you can talk about Christianity as a general, as a generalization, just like you can talk about
history. I'm interested in history. I'm interested in why over the last 2,000 years it's become impossible to introduce tantric practices on a large scale to the West. Why was that impossible? Why didn't Tantra arrive in Venice? Why wasn't it part of the European Renaissance? I'm interested in those questions. I take those questions very seriously.
That's a good question.
You can't just say that all religions are the same and you have solved the problem. I didn't say that. No.
I didn't say that at all.
You must discuss.
They have different concerns, they have different practices. They are very different. But you have to be careful with making them too homogeneous. And especially you have to also make sure that you talk about the religion. Where is that religion now? Buddhism in the 8th century is different from Buddhism now. These things evolve.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But they evolve within certain constrictions that are interesting. And that has to do with fundamentals.
Yeah, but again, I mean, who knows where these religions are going to be in 500 years with the current evolution, with the digital revolution, with the dialogue between the East and the West. Who knows where these religions are going to be?
But Thomas, I'm not going to sit on the wayside as a passive observer. I'm going to get involved to be an activist here. That's what I'm interested in. Yeah, and I'm interested in investing my time and the rest of my life where it's best invested. And this is exactly what I'm starting the Silk Route, which is the biggest construction product of human history, by far the most successful one. By far the most cultured one, and certainly the origin of any idea of cosmopolitanism that we have. And it turns out that an incredibly important byproduct of cosmopolitanism that constantly enriches it, goes in and out of cosmopolitanism, are tantric practices. That's why I'm seriously interested as a social philosopher in Tantra. Now, then I'm most interested in tantric practices have existed in the Americas? Yes. Tantric practices have existed in Asia? Certainly. They've also been written down. There've been schools of thought. You could follow these patterns. You could compare comparative studies, which is fantastic. You have access to all these things. Now, it turns out that once the trade route stopped and you built large cities and nation states, and you built these nation states on foundations sort of pop religions, which we call the West, including North America today, it's become a lot harder to be able to do these tantric practices until recently. And the only reason why it's recently become possible is because these old religions are literally dying. We're moving into sort of a nihilistic phase in history when it comes to the West, which is what Nietzsche talked about. He talked really about not only the death of Christianity, but he talked about the death of Islam. So that's what I'm going to write in the new book. These two religions are more or less doomed, or they be marginalized. They can do certain things in society, but can no longer have a universal claim to religious truth or to metaphysics or to the narrative. We would laugh at that today. We would laugh at the idea that somebody from Mecca or somebody from Rome would come in with a robe and dictate us we should live our lives. And that's why Jordan Peterson, these guys failed. They haven't seen that. There's no way back. So if there's no way back, the question is, what kind of landscape opens up now? And I agree with you totally. This is fun. It's experimental. It's wide open. It is decentralized. It's bound to be tantric, but nasty tantric and fake tantric and pseudo tantric and whatever. And we're trying to find is what kind of authenticity could there possibly be, or what kind of signs should we look for that could tell this is probably something authentic. And kind of Andrew has tried out, following the traditional schools could be one way of doing it. That's like tantric conservative. Yeah, possibly, but not the only option. Certainly not. Especially because if you're a Westerner and you're sitting here in 2020, the only way you can have access to tradition is by reading books. And the first thing you notice when you start reading The theories of these religions is that this was not how you access them in the first place, but it's impossible for you today to access them the way it was accessed, face to face with an older teacher, you're the younger student or whatever, in a spiritual school somewhere in Tibet or in Iran or in India. We can't even do that because we're grown-up Westerners and we can only access this through books. So we have to find another pattern, another way to get towards the Tantric.
Well, usually in the Vajrayana tradition, the teacher is absolutely key. So you follow the teacher. So whatever the teacher is teaching, that's what you follow. It could be a lot of things. I'm not saying it has to be like 100,000.
Yeah, because it's very embodied Tantra, right? It's actually looking at
actually really have to follow
that person in the world, right? How is that person interacting? And then you go like, whoa, that's interesting. I didn't know that you could be like that. And then there's also this other element that we often discussed, right? To raise the wisdom, and that you cannot copy it. You cannot simply do mimesis, right? Because if you would just start behaving like that person, right, then everybody would think you were crazy. And apparently then you realize, well, I can't just copy that. So this way of being in the world, this attitude is actually something that I need to develop myself, but I can see it in somebody else, that this concept is, or that this is something that's possible. It's something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. And this is interesting. If you do crazy wisdom and you understand that's what you're getting engaged with, so this teacher or mentor of yours is somebody you can't copy. You can't do that behavior. He's going to fuck your wife tomorrow, whatever. And you realize, okay, I cannot be him, right? That is actually the best inoculation you could possibly have against becoming part of a lynch mob.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the Eastern answer to the lynch mob problem, which is universal and that all cultures have always had to address. And this is where I can take my knowledge of Zoroastrianism and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. There's that point, realize that this person now is outside in the sense that he realizes that conforming to practices that people do is no longer of interest.
No,
that was
basic. I mean, I agree.
That's what you did as a child, right? You don't want to be the seaweed that just conforms to other people's behavior. You don't want to be manipulated by the crowd into believing certain
That's
things.
the overman, right?
That's the overman. You don't want to be corrupted like by somebody telling you like you can get all these things if you just follow. If you just sell your soul, you get these things, right? Yeah, so all these corruptions, manipulations, conformations that the seaweed or the population go through, you finally realize that you're lucky enough to be outside of that. But then you're immunized against the lynch mob. That then turns in Zoroastrianism, turns around to an ethical imperative. Like if you're lucky enough to not be part of the lynch mob, you got to stand up against it. Because if you can't stand up against it when it comes running after you or somebody next to you, you are part of the lynch mob. There's no third option. There's never a third option.
So that's not so successful, right? I mean, that's the problem. Even so, Christianity is completely built on this idea. Look at what happened to this guy, Jesus, right? He was innocent, was a fantastic being. There was a mob, and the mob killed that son of God, right? So let's not do that. This is evil. This is awful. So basically, that's the core of this religion, right? Did Christianity follow that? No. I mean, they were burning Jews. They were burning heretics. So it doesn't work by simply showing people, we don't want to be like that. And let's all agree we're not going to be like that. That's a Sutric stance. It never works. It never works. You have to teach people.
Again, this is why
acting according to the let's say the incentives of archaic default religion. You cannot only do that by some simple, follow these rules. It will break down at some point. And this is where this tantric layer kind of comes in.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so I just want to say
people to avoid going into these stances where their personalities are taken over and erased, where their individuality is erased by the mob. Yeah.
So the essential thing of Tantra is I think a teacher. I want to insist on that. And that it's not something that you can do by yourself. So if you adopted a bunch of esoteric practices on your own, you would fail and it would be ridiculous, So the whole thing has to be a living transmission, a creative living transmission. That is, it may be traditional on one level, but it can't be it has to be alive. That's why it's a living teacher. It's not Jesus who's already dead, you know?
Oh, it's even a crazy wisdom teacher if it's a good one. It has to be. And it's not even tantric otherwise, because if you have a teacher that you just mimic, then you're just a craftsman following another craftsman.
No, you're not mimicking.
That's fine. But that's Sutra. You're still in the Sutric, the wrong. You're not immunized against the lynch mob when it comes after you. That's why mixing Girard and Tantra here between the three of us is so damn interesting, because we have discussed it in the past, and it's not in Girard, but it's a logical conclusion of Girard looking at Eastern religion, is that it's precisely the Christian wisdom teacher who's the symbol in Eastern religion, all what then Christianity tried to do with Christ on the cross, and later did with their martyrs, and later did with the saints in Catholicism. That's why I think Catholicism will outlast the other varieties a lot more, because they have the saints, and the saints are incredibly important. But the thing is that you put the martyr on the wall and says that that's a good role model for you to follow, because you can't follow Christ himself. That's how it works in Catholicism. But when it comes to the tantric practices, you don't have the guy on the wall. You have a living crazy wisdom teacher in front of you who is so fucking terrible or unpredictable in his or her behavior that you can't follow him or her. That is the real tantra. It's alive, like you said. But it's not just a great, good teacher that you copy.
No.
That is Sutra. No, this is the guy, when you leave that realm and you move on to another realm, the tantric realm is certainly when, oh my God, all the things that I thought were banned or I couldn't handle, whatever, are suddenly in front of me. What the fuck am I going to do with this? And I can't take guidance from the teacher, because I now have to decide on my own what to make of the situation. That's exactly when you get a sense of self, tantric sense of self. And the point with it, socially, there's a point here. The point with socially is you go up to the guy who's been there for 14 years up in the mountains, you drag him down when you got the war coming at the oasis along the trade route, precisely because he'll be the only guy. There's always the guy with the stick who comes down from the mountain, is a bit bored, and he's kind of disturbed because he was jerking off on drugs for 4 years or something on the mountain or whatever. And he comes down into the valley, and they got this war going on between these two clans that are basically destroying the oasis, and women get raped and everything. And he walks into the village and said, I told you this would happen if you did this and this and this, and I told you if you'd only done this and this and this would not have happened. Now, when you finally listen to what I say, this is your last chance. This is a savior statement. Salshan, the Messiah, is always at the end. The last chance for civilization to survive, the last chance before the town goes down in flames, is always this guy who comes in uncompromisingly, saying exactly what needs to be said, and then he finishes off by saying, and if you guys want to kill me, because in most cases people do, then do so. But then you're predictable. Then you're boring like hell, and your town will go down in flames. That's what will happen. I couldn't care less. It's like he's prepared for delivering that. That's the prophet in the Old Testament, Judaism. It's the same guy. You have the Salshans in Persian. You have the same thing in Indian, Chinese history. You have these guys who basically train. This is the ultimate aim of Tantra. This is to create this guy who is so inoculated against all the stupidity of human society that he can go into it with some kind of heart and say, it's like he doesn't even feel anything. It's more like it's his job. It's his job just to deliver it. And I think the Christ figure has a lot to go for this as well. That's why Nietzsche is pro the Christ figure, but he's certainly not pro the religion that was based on the mythology of the guy on the cross. That's not what he's pro. Nietzsche regards...
Nietzsche is somebody who went back to, let's say, the core of Christianity and also the interpretation of Christianity in the first 1,000 years. And he was very much against what Christianity had morphed into, and rightfully so. And in the end, I mean, in the end of his life, he signed with, the crucified one. I think he reached very similar conclusions to Girard, but he went crazy before he could all work it out.
Correct. And the God that he killed is obviously his father's Protestant God. And Protestantism is the first one of the three Christianities that will go down in flames and disappear. And whatever is left of it's just basically American Las Vegas commercialism anyway. So it's the least tantric religion ever invented would be modern North American Christianity. But when it comes to the understanding of these mechanisms, I think if we start to think of Tantra now connected to the Salshant and the Messiah, Then it gets really interesting, because I think the crazy wisdom teachers who then popped up and became the Padmasambhava, we talked about him, the founder of Vajrayana. Yeah. We had Bodhidharma, also Persian, who was the founder of Jan in China, that then became Zen in Japan, Zen in Korea, etc. These guys that sort of, on top of Gautam Shakyamuni, obviously was good enough, like a Moses of the East, to build further religious schools on, that were credible because the quality of everything, all the building bricks were good enough to build a proper Silk Route religion. And I would credit Buddhism for being more important there than Zoroastrianism and Taoism, although I love them even more. But I would certainly do so when it comes to the schools you build stuff on. And you can now take any of these sort of bricks and these building of bricks. But the point here is, for society as a whole, is that Tantra is the only milieu in a society where a savior can be produced. You see my point? The social cannot come out of any other environment than a lot of tantric training. That is certainly part of Christianity too.
I think the tzaddik in the Jewish tradition is a very much a crazy wisdom master. There's been
it's going out in the desert. It's talking to the devil. It's being tested. All those things in Christianity are part of this too. This is where the tantric really comes into the picture. So ironically, it is in Christianity, I would agree, but it's never been part of Christian practice. It's like the Christ went out in the desert was only for a few saints to do later, but he wasn't really part of widespread Christian practice, because Christianity quickly became urbanized and it became part of a power game and a certain feudal structure, where Christianity's job was basically to tell people on Sundays that you should work for 6 days a week for the Lords, they own you, and that's it.
But doesn't the original Christianity with like Christ and the disciples hanging, doesn't that seem like a kind of a tantric community, like, you know?
Here's a good
ways,
thing.
no,
Okay.
no.
Andrew,
I mean, it does to me. Like it just seems like
Andrew. Wait.
And then
wait, Andrew.
He's going to the temple and then he's drinking with prostitutes, and it seems.
I know I shouldn't interrupt you, Andrew, but I have to. Okay.
You will.
This brings us to gnosis.
As you always do. Okay.
Okay. No, but this brings us that I honor you for. Okay, we've discussed the term gnosis in the past, and I've traced where the problem occurs that irritates me. It was Herbert Gunther himself, the Canadian, introduced proper Vajrayana. Wait a second, let me finish. The proper Vajrayana Buddhist introductor to the West, Herbert Gunther, who then brought Chogyam Trungpa over here in the 1970s. And that's the tradition we all three honor, and Dzogchen later. So Herbert Gunther was the one who mistakenly started interpreting enlightenment from Avesta Sanskrit as gnosis. Because when I talk to Grad Kaminsky, he says, I'm definitely monist. There's nothing dualist at all about Thakton Khepra's teaching. There's nothing dualist at all about Vajrayana Buddhism. It's exclusively hardcore monist in his worldview. Everything is interconnected with everything else. So that means, but the problem in the West is that all the different schools of thought here, philosophies, etc., from Plato onwards, Christianity, Islam, always discuss Gnosticism as the fundamental form of dualism, meaning it's a Manichaean tradition. Manichaeism, right? That is the perception of gnosis is in the West.
Well, that's why I would say Gnostic
word gnosis. It's not knowledge in some kind of universal sense that everything is connected. It's knowledge as separated from the world. It's a separation of body and soul from one another, where the soul is superior to the body. This is Mani. This is Manichaeism, influencing Augustine, certainly influencing Paul. Maybe Christ wasn't agnostic at all. We never know. Maybe you could say that at least that was Nietzsche's thesis on Christ, but no doubt about it, the Paul, Augustine, the church fathers, the 3rd century when Christianity was formulated, Gospels put together, it's all Gnostic in that sense. It's a Gnostic heritage that Christianity struggled with ever since. And when it comes to Islam, it is completely Gnostic, aggressively dualist. When Muslims want to give you a really bad time, as they do with Zoroastrians, they call you, oh, you believe the creator and the creation was one and the same thing, you nasty person, right? It's unbelievable to a Muslim that creator and creation could be the same thing. They would have slaughtered Spinoza even before the Christians and the Jews would have. So monism is, that's why I love Vajrayana and Zoroastrianism, because I totally agree with the monist worldview. And I don't think we could ever pretend to go back to dualist worldview and make it credible again. We know the havoc it causes. We know it's blatantly untrue.
But there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on in Christianity, right? For example, process theology. This is a very big thing in Christianity now, right? I mean, it's kind of like as monist as you can get it, right? And it's kind of like super, I mean, it's very brainy, but this is a good example of what I mean. Where are these religions going to be in 500 years if they survive, right? They might disappear. There's so much going on. These are
Thomas. I grew up with process theology. It was my uncle. He was an expert on it. So process theology starts after Whitehead, who we love. He's one of our messiahs. After White and Hawthorne and the other guys started doing process theology, so they wanted to introduce these ideas and check if Christianity was still around. Already they're the post-Christians. And when you get to the 1970s, they're literally writing Christian books on the death of God. So, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting. But it's a very theological, very elite exercise. If anything is tantric Christianity, it would be academic exercise.
Yeah, but I didn't say that was tantric.
It's not a mass movement in Christianity or anything like that. I think Christianity is going aggressively Protestant in Africa. They're going after gay guys and things and kill them. The rest is just Catholicism, which is also falling apart. The fucking Pope can't make up his mind whether he likes or hates gay people even. He can't make a decision. It's not going very well for Pope Francis. Let's say that he invited the gay guys. We thought it would modernize. And a couple of weeks ago, there would never be.
Okay, good. My point was rather, there's chaos everywhere. These are times of creativity. This is what Girard called apocalyptic times. Because all of the old certainties are disappearing. Yeah. And of course, this is very dangerous. We might kill each other and it might be the end of humanity. But what also might happen is that we have now like an enormous clash of ideas like we never had before. What's going to come out of that? So that's what I mean. I'm not making claims that Christianity was tantric or anything like that. That's not my point. My point is that all of these religions are in flux. Everybody's influencing everybody. And, it's a big chaos.
Yeah, and there are also the dangers. For example, we know for a fact that fundamentalism was developed in the West in the 20th century. It was developed as Christianity, Christian fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism, and also communist and Nazi fundamentalism. Okay, these are problematic, caused havoc in the world, killed hundreds of millions of people. The problem here is that precisely because I agree with you here, I think fundamentalism could also be part of Hinduism, Buddhism, even Zoroastrianism and Taoism. We never thought that would happen. We thought these sort of trade route traditions would be immune to that. I don't think they're immune to that. I think Buddhism could go incredibly militant. It has in Sri Lanka. It did in Burma. They threw out the Rohingyas. And it certainly is going that direction in India because they're now mimicking the West. They're mimicking the West. Like our religions are weak. They're not potent enough. They're not militant enough. They're not nationalistic enough. And do we dare to think that, well, maybe Chinese communism is their fundamentalist religion? Okay, so there you go. But that's problematic. Xi Jinping in China, I mean, if we study him as a dictator, a tyrant who could cause havoc on the world, and he just invaded Hong Kong the same way a certain guy invaded Poland in 1939, okay? Bad sign, bad omen. He just invaded Burma, by the way, too. So if Xi Jinping is doing this shit, then certainly we have exported fundamentalism from the West to the East. So I agree with you. That's also problematic. Mm-hmm. But hey, we're on top of things.
Chaos is very good news, according to Chogyam Trungpa again. So
what is good news?
Chaos is very, very good news.
Is good news.
Yeah, I agree. I think when other guys get divorced, that means I can fuck their wives. Good news. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Huh?
Okay, maybe, yeah. Well, chaos is opportunity.
But Thomas, you have more experience than me. But when it comes to tantric sex, we are talking about tantra tonight, after all.
Oh dear.
And we said that sex is fine and we're great, and we're with it and all that. But where do you put the possibility of introducing tantric sex in the smartest, best way possible to the West and get it right? What's your experience in that department?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, that's basically what people are trying to find out, right? So there's an enormous amount of people who are, I mean, the traditional Buddhists are bringing Vajrayana to the West, which traditionally sexuality was always included in Vajrayana, but of course in the West that's not really possible. So the Dalai Lama said, we're not going to go there. So after the problems with Chogyam Trungpa, it was decided that the West was not going to get any genuine tantra, right? They can't handle it. Yeah. So but then it was taken over by a lot of people, kind of renegade Buddhists, some Westerners who got some training in the East and then took it to the West. And now you have
don't forget Osho here.
You have now. I mean, now this is like it's one big chaos, right? So you have like a blend of Hinduism, Buddhism, BDSM, New Age, and people are just trying out stuff and making workshops, and the workshops that don't work, they disappear, and the workshops that catch on, they remain. Let's hope that the quality remains in
And can I then ask you, are the woke attacks on tantric sex that have been around, exploded the last years, are they good news or bad news? Are they good shit test or the bad news?
They're good news because they're forcing everybody to be very careful with what they're doing, to streamline their practices, to make sure that people, that they don't let in people who are not ready for this. So all these woke attacks are good. And the good communities, they will survive these attacks. So in that sense, I don't demonize woke people and stuff like that. I mean, okay, good. There's a lot of scapegoating going on, but at the same time, it forces people to think about what are we doing. And there's always some truth in these criticisms, right? And that forces people to get better.
Yeah,
and it's tough.
I increasingly scapegoat woke less in that department, but these days I'm really going after woke capitalism, which I think is absolutely terrible. I'm becoming a Marxist criticist of woke. I've done episodes of that recently, but that's really where the problem really lies. That terrifies me to see people get fired now, and that happens here in Sweden all the time. See people get fired for possibly having said something that nobody's even proved they said, because people in closed rooms with knives have hit them in the back without even telling who did it. That's exactly what's happening. It started with Me Too over here in Sweden, and it's getting really nasty. But now it's moved into corporations, and it's actually marketing departments and people like that who go woke these days. But that I think is, to a certain extent, it can serve as a shit test to cleanse out, tantric communities that probably didn't have their shit together to begin with. But I think we can't be naive about it as well. It also has to be fought back. For example, I get furious with this sort of manic consent culture all the time, because I can tell you one thing: if you're going to have tantric sex, one thing that doesn't work is to sign a fucking legal document that you have to approve in certain legal ways with an app on the phone before anybody else does anything to you. That's going to kill it all totally, right? That's like the first thing you need to get rid of. So there's a lot of again the Christian mindset, the sort of Protestant mindset that things can be controlled in a way that I dictate, so I can approve everything at every station, knowing what's going on. I think that whole sort of neurotic mindset about things exactly what Tantra disqualifies right away. You're out of control here. It's certainly not Tantric you think can control everything that happens to you. It's going to be fiendishly difficult to get that right.
It's not clear what will work in the long run in the West, right? That's just the question. In what kind of format will Tantra manifest in the West, and to what extent will it be connected to Buddhism and to Hinduism and all these other traditions there? Because also the East influences the West, but the West influences the East, right? So there's a crosstalk going on. Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, and so we'll see what comes out of it. But one thing so Alexander, you said like this is the times of cults and sects and secret societies, and that is definitely what's going to happen, right? It will be very difficult to find the really good networks to associate yourself with, because these networks are not interested anymore in advertisement, right? And they make it difficult to join them, because these practices are not for everybody. No. So it will be difficult to join them.
Oh yeah. There'd be gated communities in the deepest sense of the word. Yeah. That will happen. But
on the other hand, I think that sort of like, if people are sincere, they find the right people somehow. It's like,
but it will be difficult. Yeah, it will get more difficult.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I go to my own life, and we're all part of the men's movement in Europe, all three of us. And I don't do serious spiritual work in any way in the public any longer. I certainly make sure the cameras, microphones are turned off, and that I know everyone in the room, and I know that they know what's going on before I do anything that remotely looks like a spiritual practice, right? I won't talk about it in public. I certainly won't. I'm implementing the Barred Absolute in my own life, and that is because I am seriously interested in whatever could be tantric today, no matter what it is we're dealing with. And that is precisely where I think also the first sort of digital gated communities will really happen. It will not be Clubhouse, that's for sure. To me, Clubhouse is like that's like the lowest of the low. That's like, okay, that's where all the trolls ended up finally. Like in closed rooms where they can, knife each other to death in their backs without being responsible for it because nobody records what they're saying or doing. I think Clubhouse will have so many lawsuits 3 months from now, it will just go down in flames like one of the biggest mistakes could ever come up with. And I'd be happy to do that and be part of that too, because that's not the way to pursue things at all. When we talk about these sort of closed rooms, at least that we practice, We certainly don't want to have anybody there who doesn't want to be there in the first place. And the people who are there and excited about being there should fully contribute in every way they possibly can. And if you're ahead of them, if you're ahead of their curve, then certainly you should lead and they should trust you in that. And they shouldn't sit there and think they can predict everything that's going to happen along the course, because that's not how you learn things. That's not spiritual practice at all. That's just neurotic control behavior. And a lot of the current mythology is based on that. You can predict before something happens what you're going to experience it afterwards. And yet we have ridiculous court cases now in Sweden, especially with women suing men for rape, because the woman has experienced afterwards, only subjectively, that whatever she went through could possibly be considered a rape. Not technically, not proven, no evidence. No, she just feels that way. And this is now being taken seriously in the legal departments of this country. It terrifies me.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting point, though, that you make, Thomas, that the woke people are actually, they're horrid, they're terrible, but they're doing a service in some kind of a way. Like, it's like the devouring mother is coming to just scare the shit out of everybody, so everybody gets their act together and does it right.
Well, I agree in the sense that I've not been part of anything in the last 10 years that couldn't or shouldn't withstand a woke attack. And if it couldn't, then I shouldn't want to be part of it in the first place. Then the quality is too bad.
Yeah. You have to be pretty naive, I think, to let yourself be, destroyed by those people.
It's not like woke was just invented. Lynch mobs have been around forever. Yeah. People are terrified of these things like sex and violence. Sex and violence is also the root of all evil in the sense is a root of envy and is a root of all these nasty things that I agree Christianity and Zoroastrianism, these religions all deal with. And unfortunately, at a time like ours, when things are so unevenly distributed and that is made public and everybody knows it, of course there are going to be mobs. Why wouldn't there be? There'd be more mobs than ever. Why would people don't know different than they used to be? And with no other teachings to follow, you can make up your own mind about just about everything. All you need to do is to find a few other idiots out there who go with your line, and you got these cults and these sects that are one after another weirder than the other one. So we're going to have exquisite, fantastic orders and loges and cults and things that actually are very thought through, certainly tantric, possibly going into tantric mode we've never ever seen before. But we're also going to have these sort of sloppy sects and cults for the underclasses where just bitter people gather and go Sibelian. Again, there's the Apollonian, but there's also the Dionysian, there's also the Sibelian. And that's exactly why, while the Sibelian rarely pops up in history, this is precisely the time the Sibelian comes back. It's Sibella, the goddess who wanted to fuck her son and had to castrate him because she desired him so much. So she's coming into the picture with all the bitterness, followed by her eunuchs, right? There's so much of that around today, and it's going to be around for a long time.
But this is what we talked about often, right? So it's basically this digital network. We networked everybody. This is very, very dangerous. So it's not good that everybody's connected to everybody to this extent, because that basically brings out archaic humans, archaic religion, the default religion, and that scapegoating. So that's where woke comes from, right? That's what it is. It's basically just this old archaic religion that comes back. And the funny thing is that it piggybacks, or it kind of rides on Christianity, right? Because it has this Christian obsession with the victim, right? That's the whole core of Christianity, right? Protect the victim, which is great.
And Islam is what Islam Nietzsche's is the same way, even worse.
Point is Nietzsche predicted woke. Nietzsche predicted that protecting the victim will be used to kill a lot of people and to make more victims. That's the core of Nietzsche. He got that very, very, very right. And it's only now that it's really manifest, that Nietzsche's predictions really, really come out. Because Nazi Germany was something else, right? That was kind of like brutal paganism. That's basically, they say no to Christianity, and we go back to radical paganism. And then that's where I disagree with you on Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche is not like that at all. Nietzsche is not simplistically anti-Christianity like that. He pointed out the dangers of Christianity. He pointed out that Christianity can be used in stealth to become a pagan, to go back to the pagan mechanisms. And that's what's happening now. It's kind of like, it's like Christianity, like concern for the victim is used as this like tiny little layer of morality to justify like going back to this old-fashioned paganism. Like, let's form a mob and going after the victims. It's incredibly transparent.
Nietzsche's concern was morality, and Nietzsche's concern was self-identity. So it's the aristocrat and the aristocrat's morality he's interested in, and the possible creation of morality from scratch.
These are tantric concerns.
Nietzsche is tantric, he's not Christian. Exactly, I'm glad we agree. He's tantric, he's not Christian, absolutely. And that's why he refers back to Zoroaster, because it's not that he claims world history, but he claims Western history. He claims the origins of Western history. That's what he does in his whole move.
What do you mean claims?
He works from Western history, like what is the history of the West? In his world, that would be Greek, Hebrew, and even Persian. So it's the Greek, Hebrew, Persian axis he works with. That eventually becomes your Christianity.
I'm not saying that Nietzsche kind of discovered the tantric origins of Christianity. I think that's where we maybe misunderstand each other. I'm saying that, you know, he looked at Christianity and saw like, this is where it went wrong, and this is where, well, you could say like, this is where it went, he just described this is where it went wrong.
I would disagree with you.
I'm not saying that he discovered some kind of lost forms of Christianity. He just basically is part of this ongoing evolution of the Christian religion, just like Calvin and Luther and blah 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 blah.
I disagree, though. I don't think there's any hope for Christianity anywhere in Nietzsche at all. So
I'm not saying that there's any hope for Christianity.
Then he's not a Christian. He's not a reformator either. And he doesn't find any tantric origin in Christianity.
What's going on? I don't try to tell people. That's what you do. You say, oh, you have to go there, you have to go there.
No.
I don't do that. Well, not at that level. I try to understand what's going on and what are all these thinkers doing, and in what way have these people interacted with each other.
Okay.
There would be no Nietzsche without Christianity. I mean, it's
there'd be no Nietzsche without the Greeks. I said it. The tantric origin of Nietzsche is with the Greeks, not with Christianity. Read Nietzsche. Come on.
Yeah, of course, the Greeks are also important. I mean,
because he's a Dionysian. According to Nietzsche, he's a Dionysian put in relation to Apollonia, which is Tantric and Sutric and Nietzsche. And the Dionysian is disqualified from Christianity.
Yeah.
So that's
I agree with that.
Yeah, so the tantric origin, actually, at least Nietzsche would claim himself as the Greeks. And I mean, he was heroic with the Greeks, and he even fought Plato. He was a Heraclitean. He was Heraclitus and later back Zoroaster, and process thinking and thinking the event. You know, those were the things Nietzsche was
He was also a psychologist. He was basically doing, and he tried to understand the way humans work in a very pragmatic way.
Yeah.
So that's why I disagree with Heidegger, with him turning Nietzsche into a big metaphysicist. I think that is bullshit. So Nietzsche was somebody who tried to understand how he's very similar to Girard. He's basically doing an anthropology, and that's why he was also he's very similar to Freud. He's more similar to Freud than to
a book is called The Genealogy of Morals. If you call a book The Genealogy of Morals, you're an anthropologist.
We should have put, Girard and Nietzsche should be put in a room together, right? And then we just sit back with a cigar and listen to them. Oh, that's how you think about it. So.
Yeah, and throw in a few Islamic and Buddhist distortions into the conversation as well. So
and then
that's what I was going to do.
This is trying to understand the let's say human nature, right? How do humans work, and being very pragmatic about it. Like, how do they actually work? Not how should they work? That's a very tantric idea. So it's basically like figuring out desire. How does that work? So Christianity would say like desire, very, very dangerous. Don't go there. 10 commandments, right? And especially in the end, do not covet your neighbor's wife and stuff like that. This is a big warning against desire running rampant, which is correct. It's dangerous. But then Tantra goes like, well, and Buddhism in general goes like, well, let's just investigate what is dangerous about it. And then let's play around with it and put it to good use. So that we don't go into this world renunciation, right? We don't become monks in a monastery, who can't swim in the sea without wearing a robe, right? But Tantra is going to investigate. Well, okay, now we understand how desire works, and how can we put that to good use?
And the thing here is, it's topological. So if you got a town that's locked up and nobody really leaves the town at all and they're stuck there, you create a religion like Christianity and Islam and it works wonderfully. If you got a trade post, people are coming in through and they're going out again, they're coming in through and they go out again, and they might never come back, or they might come back and even try to live there. Now, if people pass through, you become a cosmopolitan. And that's exactly what tantric practices come out of those environments. That's exactly why it's very, very hard. That's exactly why Confucianism did not produce any tantric practices at all. It is nothing but a state religion. It's like, yeah, here's a state and here's state practices and here's bureaucracy, and to be part of this big machine is fantastic. It's like Prussian nationalism was created by Confucius. It's really a religion to the Chinese. They declared it a religion. No tantric practice whatsoever anywhere. Why? Because people are permanently settled, live where they were born, they live their entire lives, and they should never move away from anywhere. It's the complete opposite of the sort of flow and process you find in trading cultures. And you can see the same thing if you want to go to the Americas, because the Americas is full of places where permanently settled people were stuck in one place and never left. And they got very, very bloody after a time, centralized, ideological, fundamentalist ideas and things. And then you had the trade routes that people passed through all the time. You had none of these problems. They had different problems, sure, but like pandemics are a result of trading. So one of the benefits of locking up a town and having a membrane around it is that you get protected from pandemics, like China successfully did this time. Whereas, any place where people go through and pass through all the time, like London, become these places where pandemics hit really hard. So it is a complex picture, truly fascinating. But I think it's unavoidable today that cosmopolitanism will win in this paradigm. Yeah. The digital.
On the other hand, there's something wild about Tantra. There's something like in Tantric culture that needs to be a bit outside of the mainstream.
No. Andrew, my point is this.
I know there's a cosmopolitan aspect.
Andrew, if people pass through and they leave, you can't contain them. You can't preach a fundamentalist, simplistic idea of the world to people who will leave tomorrow. You can only go to where they already are. An important word that Thomas took here, that Nietzsche, is pragmatist. You can only have a pragmatic approach to other people. Say you run a little spiritual school and you have a little ego and you want to be pretty successful. Now, if you run a little spiritual school and it's a tight-knit community, settled in one place, doing farming, they're never going to leave, they're going to marry the neighbor's daughter, whatever. You start a church and you will then soon, because of the topology, preach a religion that's very simplistic, strictly try to contain the lynch mobs or whatever, and you get Christianity or Islam. The Islamic Ummah is essentially just a religion for the village that never moves. But also, this is why Heidegger is he's Christian. All these people, philosophers who celebrate where they were born, and they never want to go anywhere, and they found everything they were looking for in the place where they were born, that's Sutric. That's where they comes from. The tantric is always tied to movement, because you can only preach the tantric to somebody who's genuinely interested in the truth, no matter what. But he could leave tomorrow.
When I practiced Tantra in Chogyam Trungpa's tradition, there were tents everywhere. Like it was nomadic. Like he was always building these tents, and then like going somewhere else. It's like not permanent. There's always a flux and a change and a transformation going on.
That's how trade posts work too. Yeah. You had tents everywhere. And then when they got affluent, they built Dubais. So go to Samarkand, for example. Old, beautiful, ancient city. All cultures have met, mixes of people, ethnicities mixed up like mad. Okay, they don't take even their Islam too seriously, because nobody takes things too seriously in a trading post, right? It's still like that in Samarkand. You go to Samarkand, at the center of the city, it's the fucking Dubai, but it's been Dubai for 2,000 years, like huge temples and buildings and mosques and everything. And then you go outside, and actually we go out in the suburbs. People are literally still living in tents. You're absolutely correct. It's a good observation. And you take that community, and you take a few people in that community who want to pursue, like, how far can we take spirituality? How can we attract traders who actually just stop by and walk on the next day? Okay, let's figure that out. You need mountains. And you need all kinds of exercise and practices. And suddenly you're going to retreats for 40 years because it pays off. You don't see that in settled communities with farming. I think Confucianism here is the one we should compare to Christianity and Islam.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
Permanently settled Sutric religions. That did work to a certain extent, could still work, but they cannot respond to the needs of being truly cosmopolitan today. Because I don't think you can be a true cosmopolitan, be ingrained in other cultures, understanding people come from, unless you're curious enough to go tantric. That, I would argue, is the strong case for Tantra today.
And what about this Taoism, Confucianism kind of configuration in Japan? In China and in the East.
They separate. So you got Shintoism in Japan and Buddhism, and you do certain things in your life are Shinto, certain things in your life are Buddhist. And Shinto is all about obligation to the emperor and fall before the emperor.
No, I mean, in like the Taoist practices, are they?
That's precisely what Buddhism and Taoism operate in parallel. These are old ancient civilizations with trade, very urban cultures. Like Japan is a seafaring culture, full of people, like trade, big cities, ports, everything. And they traded, of course, with the Chinese. And China, Japan then traded with Persia and India eventually along the Silk Route. And these huge trading economies require Taoism and Buddhism. And where do the Taoists go? They go into the mountains. They meditate. Okay, that's where you get the tantric practices. They always come out of monasterial life. Whereas what did Confucianism do? Confucianism in China, strict order, this is how you build an empire and try to maintain it for as long as possible before it falls apart or is attacked by Mongols. And of course, they exported that to Korea, exported that to Japan. So Confucianism is much more similar to Christianity and certainly to Islam than any of the Silk Route triad traditions, because the Silk Route triad, they trade posts. They're like trading religions. That's where they're processed. That's where they're moving. That's where they're tantric. That's where you get the tantric traditions.
Yeah. Well, when I was studying Confucianism, it's not very clear that Confucianism is a religion. It's about rites. It's about just...
It is definitely a religion in the sense that it's organized as a people relate to one another, which is what the word religare means. And Chinese people call it a religion. So I think we should call our state market system a religion too. I've argued that in the book Syntheism. I think the belief in the state and the market, as we believe here in the West, are religions. They're religious practices. They're religious beliefs. That's what they work.
Now we have a religion being developed, right? So it's the religion, as you say, now being consolidated by big companies and being imposed on the world through digital media.
Yeah, with moralism tied to it and propaganda and all kinds of hypocrisies and things. I would say that, it's a bit like corporations now trying to be sort of Protestant Baptist churches, right? Wouldn't that be a correct description of what Western corporations are trying to become? We should call them out. Sure, if you are a Protestant Baptist church and you live according to your own principles, that's okay. But they're all going to look hypocritical very, very soon. That's what we're going to discover.
Yes, I mean, it's just like amazing. These companies are doing all kinds of shady stuff, right? Pollution and very cheap labor in third world countries. And they're kind of like putting on these extreme moralistic stances about nonsensical topics. And then many people are buying, it seems to work, right? Many people are buying it.
No, it's getting, the reaction are coming. This very week, Newsweek had a lead story about North Face, a big clothing brand in America, who decided that they would have nothing to do with the gas and the oil industry until the gas and the oil industry unified and disclosed to people that every fucking thing North Face makes is made out of oil. And of course, this is a disaster for the brand. And now it's a big story. Now we put woke against the woke, meaning you can just put industry against industry. So what is happening right now is that the exposure of the enormous hypocrisy in the corporate world is now coming from inside the corporate world, from people who want to get woke out of there. If North Face think they're so fancy, they don't even want to gas companies, they should look at their own fucking products to begin with. They never did.
It seems to be a self-destructing course that they're on. I mean, look at Google.
Google
has these researchers on AI ethics and stuff like that, and then they write an article. Google says you can't publish it, then they get fired, and there's a big... it seems that they put themselves in a position that is not sustainable.
Of course it isn't. Because it's built on this hysterical post-Christian people who think they're better than anybody else and think they can get away with absolute nonsense.
That is the incredible audacity of these people, right? So they kind of say, it's as if they kind of talk to you as if they are good people and they know exactly this is the moral life and we are on the right side and you are not. It's kind of like,
what do you think? What do you think a Pentecostal priest there in Alabama is like?
I don't know. I don't hang out.
The same. It's identical. This is just 50 or 100 years later, the same thing again. And they're also caught in the whorehouses with their pants down. This is what it's called. It's called catching the preacher in the whorehouse with his pants down. That's exactly what we're doing now with the woke people. I'm enjoying it tremendously. I mean, when Patagonia, the fashion brand, are trying to stop a dam project in Albania that should provide cheap electricity to poor Albanians, then the first question you ask is that, have Patagonia ever paid money to Patagonians for stealing their name? No, they haven't. That's the first thing you would ask, wouldn't it, right? Yeah. I'm going to make millions of dollars out of being consultant for corporations to try to get out of woke. It's already begun.
Yeah,
You are.
It's
There's also
a
the
mess.
foreman of Danone, this French, they make yogurts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he was one of the great. So I don't know how contemporary you want to make this discussion, but he was one of the great defenders of companies with social companies, right? Companies with social goals, and he
corporate
was now forced
social
to
responsibility. Yeah, exactly.
So that didn't fly with the shareholders, and he had to resign now.
Because he didn't hold.
Because he did.
No, we're going to see a lot of that. They don't understand what they're doing.
I mean, it's related to the climate question, right? I mean, there's also a lot of moralism going on and stuff like that. Well, I mean, doesn't everybody know that the solution will be technology rather than people behaving, altering their behavior, or suddenly turning to energy sources that are not as efficient?
No, they don't understand that, because that's why they love to believe in an evangelical preacher in Alabama too. People love shortcuts, quick fixes, and cheap solutions. That is my problem. Again, not going to repeat it, but that has been my problem with Christianity and Islam, that would eventually catch us up with these religions 2,000 years later, is that they're much more sophisticated religions than, say, Scientology or Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons. But I think at the end of the day, we move into this sort of more global, cosmopolitan age. I think the religions that will survive, at least mean something and have an influence in the long run, are the only ones to take on the cosmopolitan approach, where tantric worldview will be absolutely essential. I think it's impossible.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, but I'm kind of like, but I believe that again. So these religions are processes, right? And they've changed tremendously over the course of 2,000 years. So I've studied a lot of theology with a friend of mine who's a Calvinist minister in the Netherlands, and it's amazing just how these ideas change, right? So Christianity is not a fixed thing. It's very, very protean. It changes a lot, and it will be, and that's true for all religions, right? So it will be very interesting to see which religions blossom and change and basically play a role, and which religions become irrelevant. And it's very difficult to predict what is going to happen.
Yeah, I think we three agree, though, that we like the pragmatist sort of trade routes perspectivism. We love that.
No fixed beliefs, like it has to be like
no essentialism,
no Kantian dichotomies.
Yeah,
and also no Kierkegaard, the Kierkegaardian fallacy, right? I believe because it's absurd. I mean, this is something that I find mind-boggling, right? So I have like Christians who are like, they're intelligent people, and then they are struggling with, but Thomas, if I don't believe in the resurrection of Christ, then I lose my faith. So imagine that they find a document that kind of shows that the Bible, the New Testament, is a hoax, right? It's carefully crafted by people, and so then these people would say like, well, I can't be a Christian anymore because apparently this supernatural event didn't take place. I find that an incredible superficial way of having a religion, that it depends on some kind of miraculous happening, that it's conditional on believing in that absurdity, which is a Kierkegaardian idea, right?
If you turn your back on Christianity, because one, there are alternatives, and number two, there is a certain heritage, for example, agnostic dualism, that it never really dealt with and it couldn't deal with. So if you have limitations like, I can't live as a Christian, I can't be myself as a Christian, you can't be Christian. That's as easy as that. So there are other religions on offer. This is the point with the trading post as well.
Religions.
It's not that it's a supermarket with religion. It's more like it's a trading post. The religions are offered. We live in a bazaar of spirituality, and they're not offered in the sense that which one would you like, and here you pay for it. It's more like, here are the different challenges you got ahead of you, and you got to decide what kind of archetype personality you are, what kind of times you live in, and which one of these things you want to pursue. And you strongly recommended not to go for the exotic, but you strongly recommended not to go for what your parents did without thinking about it. So you strongly recommend to think for yourself and think critically, but there's no point in jumping over to the other side of the river just to find the same thing. Then it's better to be able to stay with your heritage. I agree with that. And it's interesting you should name Kierkegaard here. I would say that the problem I have with both Slavoj Žižek and Jordan Peterson, the very ironic takes on Christianity they both pursue, is that they're both Kierkegaardian. The one thing they have in common, Jordan Peterson says, I will refuse to answer the question whether I believe in God or not. And he's certainly got enough space to explain what it means with God. So he's obviously escaping something, meaning I believe in something, although I don't believe in it because I want the byproduct of the belief.
And his wife, who I spoke to, really believes.
And the same thing with Slavoj Žižek. Slavoj Žižek sits and waits and jerks off and waits for a savior to come that he doesn't believe in. Well, that's just laziness. That's just Kierkegaardian laziness. That's just pomposity. It's just vanity. It's not a proper position to take. It's not credible.
Yeah.
Nietzsche would refuse to take it.
So there's a bunch of gloomy existentialists that we can discard, in a sense.
But I would say gloomy existentialists, again, it's psychoanalysis applied on them. If they enjoy their gloom, it's very superficial.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think you're supposed to enjoy your religion at all. I suppose you're supposed to enjoy life, certainly, but understand where your enjoyments come from, what they're driven by, in what ways that a drive, a desire, in what could you possibly transcend it, and in what ways it's just a banal instinct from somewhere.
Well, a religion
and that's
should
okay.
help you
right?
to understand how you function and understand how you are in the group. And it should help you. It should help basically against group thinking that can take over and cause enormous problems, as we've seen with communism, with fascism, as we now see with woke. It's this collectivism, these collective movements. A good religion should both keep things together, but also keep things apart.
Yeah, the words we use is hyperject and anoject. So you must aspire to become a hyperject, and if you can't because you're too weak, you must support the hyperject. Because you are anojective, you will be part of the lynch mob and you'll die in disgrace, basically. You know, go down to the dustbins of history. Just another one of these weak humans who couldn't even be human. You know, that is the ethical imperative that where Christianity and Zoroastrians agree. It's the difference between Asha and Druj in Zoroastrianism. It's a question of attitude, implemented attitude. And that's what Christianity inherited. Judaism is the same thing. It certainly is a core of that in Islam too. But my problem with Islam is its rampant dualism, which I find incredibly problematic. That's to be dealt with in dialogue. Cool.
So out with the Gnostic dualists.
This was an incredibly tantric conversation, constantly interrupting and shouting and screaming and arguing.
That's
we
true.
Don't do that. We always let each other finish.
But I think the content of the conversation is better than ever.
Yeah.
I may say so, from all three of us.